Hi, everybody. Hi, Liang.
I did it.
Um, so our goal today is to talk about politics, which kind of makes me want to run screaming from the room. So if you have
Politics.
a similar reaction,
I'm scared too. I'm
you're
already
scared
scared.
too. I
I'm already
know, right?
scared.
If you at home have a similar reaction when someone says, I'd like to talk to you about politics, it's like if somebody comes to your door and says, I'd like to talk to you about God, or I'd like to talk to you about this new vacuum cleaner. That welcome, we're in the same place. But it seems so important these days with what's going on in the world that a lot of you out there are probably wanting to talk about politics to some degree, to somebody that Liang and I wanted to broach the subject, wade into it. So yeah, Liang, how are you feeling about talking about this today?
A little bit nervous because you and I had talked about Elon Musk uh, sometime last year when I bought a Tesla, and it did created a small rupture that we fortunately was able to repair later. Um, so it's not a topic that I enjoy talking about. Something it's a topic that I honestly avoid most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people have really strong feelings about politics. There's a lot of, I think, hurt under the surface, and there are a lot of people's hopes and I don't want to say dreams, but about what they want the world to be. And so underlying this, there's like this river of strong feelings. And so this is a tough topic to talk about. So anyway, specifically, we wanted to talk about um, if you have the urge to talk about this with somebody, or if somebody brings it up with you, how to have a conversation that doesn't just perpetuate the, frankly, like maybe trauma, that people
Mhm.
have felt, the real pain that people have felt around this, and maybe do something productive or healing with it.
So let me introduce myself first. My name is Liang. I'm a psychologist based in Seattle.
Intro lasts 5.5 minutes. There you go. Thanks, Liang. Liang is a wonderful psychologist, by the way. If you're anywhere near Seattle or you want to work with him online, give him a ring. You'll be glad you did.
Thank you.
I'm a psychologist too. I'm based in Phoenix.
Took some notes last night thinking about this topic. My first insight last night when I was writing it down was this that are we engaging in a conversation about the content, right? So the intellectual piece, or are we engaging in a conversation about feelings, right? And that's when it occurred to me that like why does the topic bring comes up right in a conversation with your friends and family? And more often than not, it's because the person is upset, right, about maybe something that's impacting them or something they hear in the news that it's impacting them. Or in our case, right, it's like I bought a Tesla and you have a strong reaction to that.
And Liang, do you think it's so funny when you say that? My first thought is there ever really just an intellectual conversation about politics these days? I mean,
That's
I guess in theory it's possible, but in my
yeah.
experience, I feel like that happens so infrequently.
Yeah. I That is a really good point. And I think about that too. Like what are some topics that I personally would want to talk about? Like being a Chinese American, I'm actually interested in engaging in conversations about the geopolitics of US and China, right?
Mhm.
But when I think about like why do I want to talk about this, right? Obviously I know a lot more than probably most of my friends, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably because I think like there's probably a lot of misconceptions about China, and I'm bothered by it, and I want to correct that. Now, I also honestly, generally, a lot of times am interested in politics and just learning about like what are different ways of looking at an issue, right? Let's say right now, right, it's the ice, right, in Minnesota, right?
Mhm.
That's obviously brings up a lot of emotion for a lot of people, right? And it's interesting to hear different perspective. And sometimes I think it's helpful to talk to people so that we can actually learn from each other.
Yeah, no, I like that because I feel that way too sometimes. Like there's an intellectual portion that I think especially when something is upsetting to me or I haven't figured out how I want to respond, part of me, the intellectual part, wants to sort it out, wants to look at it from different angles, wants to really understand, think it through, hear from smart and wise people how they're framing it. Um, I think the key point that you're bringing up um, is not to also forget what your feelings are about it and what your intention is for going into this conversation. You know, am I talking to this person because deep down I really want to persuade them to
Mhm,
think like
mhm,
me? Or am I talking to this person because they just happened to bring it up and I actually didn't have any intention
mhm.
to find myself in this conversation? But then, there's the question of, well, now that I'm in it, what is my intention now? Which
Right,
is to say,
right.
what do I most want? And so this is one of the things that I think is,
Yeah,
when I was reflecting on this, is helpful, is
yeah,
to think about what is it that I most want from
right,
this conversation with this person.
right.
And it may be to resolve some rift, it may be to enrich our friendship, it may be
Mhm,
to feel better inside of myself.
mhm.
Um, and then what you decide to do, can sort of can follow what your desire is for the conversation, but then at least it's conscious.
That's right.
I'll drop in also that based on what you most want from the interaction, you may not decide to talk about it at all.
Mhm,
Or if
mhm,
somebody else brings it up, you might say, you know, wow, this is a really important topic and I have some strong
mhm.
feelings about it, but probably I just would prefer to talk about something else.
Yeah. And I think there is a convention to avoid talking about politics. I think the reality is that when people take the risk to bring it up and talk about politics, as you said, there's usually an emotional component that's maybe not obvious.
I think that's true. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like from your point of view, really key to start out is to understand, what do I want from this conversation? Do I want to have an intellectual discussion? Do I want to work out some feelings I have?
Right.
Any thoughts about, I guess, especially in the situation, well, I guess in either of those, like how to approach a conversation then, or
Mhm.
what are some do's or don'ts?
If somebody is brings up a political issue, right? Let's say about ICE, then I think it's safe to assume that there's like a emotional component behind that, right? That they didn't bring it up because they want an intellectual conversation. I generally empathize, right? Hey, there's always a grain of truth, right, in how they feel and certain facts that are upsetting, right? Like there are, if we use Elon Musk as an example, right? Like there are things about him that I do not like, right? He has some far right beliefs, right? When I think about our interaction, right, I think the mistake that I made was to engage in an intellectual conversation, like, oh well, I there are parts of him that I dislike, but there are parts that I do like. In retrospect, I should have actually spend time trying to understand, like, what parts of Elon do you feel really troubled by? I'm sure I could empathize with that, and there are things about Elon that I don't like as well. I think that's probably the most important thing, is to listen and understand why the other person bring up this topic in the first place, and to empathize with that emotion, right? And find things that you can agree on.
I'm really aligned with you there. Um, and it's interesting, at some point, maybe 6 months ago or something. I looked up some of the literature on around persuasion. A situation came up with a friend, and I was trying to give them advice, and I realized, oh, I don't actually don't know so much about this. I should go look it
Mhm.
up. And what I found that was really interesting is that even when you're trying to persuade someone to your point of view, the most helpful thing you can do is listen to them, empathize with them, really try to understand their point of view, even if not on the level of content, right? Maybe they say things that you just think aren't true or you don't
Mhm.
believe. On the level of feelings or human experience, like, oh, you feel really afraid about this or that. Well, I know what that's like. That's very hard for me to feel afraid or
Mhm.
nervous or,
Mhm.
you know, so, we can empathize even if we disagree, which, by the way, is an incredibly useful tool in all relationships, to
Mhm. Mhm.
listen, find the areas of commonality, voice, validate what parts of what the other person is saying. That even when you're trying to persuade someone, if you do that first, they're much more likely to be interested in what you have to say.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's because underlying all of the the content disagreements around politics, it's almost like I feel like, where there's cultural strife in the world and people have to go in and do these truth and reconciliation committees, that there's this belief that people on the other side or people not like me have hurt me or have tried to control me or aren't really there for me.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you can show in an interaction that you really uh, see this person's humanity, you
Mhm.
see their dignity and worth and their earnestness, even with a different viewpoint, that you care about them, that you
Mhm.
want to be there for them.
Right.
On a subtext level, it heals this rift, this pain and trauma. And it's like when two friends, when you're talking about something with somebody cares about you,
Mhm.
loves you, is there
Mhm.
for you. It's
Mhm.
okay if they have some different ideas, right? Because you're there together.
Yeah.
And so it's like establishing that we're there together first piece. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think, especially assuming that this conversation is between you and somebody you care about, right? Whether it's a close friend or a family member, right? I think ultimately you do want to seek closeness, right? And I think by talking about something difficult could bring about that.
If I could hop in,
Yeah.
I would suggest that you can do this even with people you're not close to, right?
Mm.
Your coworker at the water cooler, the virtual water cooler or something, that you could still try to empathize and say, "Oh, wow, it sounds like
Mhm.
it's really
Yeah.
stressful for you, huh, Joe?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, of course,
yeah,
the issue is like, what if you disagree with their ideology, right?
right. Yes.
Let's say somebody says undocumented immigrants are here illegally, so they should all be deported, right?
Mhm.
So how do you empathize with that?
How do I empathize with that? Well, I would
Mm.
probably look, kind of like we're saying, to the
Yeah,
feeling or to the meaning level. So whenever anybody says something, just I mean, this is what I do in therapy often, is like
yeah,
pulling back the, the screen here for a second. But there's content of what somebody's saying. There's
mhm,
feeling underneath it as a deeper level, and then there's meaning underneath that. Um, so oftentimes when people talk to me in therapy, I try to reflect back what is the feeling or the meaning. So if
right,
somebody said that, I would say, "Boy, it sounds like that really troubles you," or this has been on your mind a lot lately,
mhm,
hasn't it?" I'm not
mhm,
saying, "Oh, I
yeah,
do think it ought to
right,
be on your mind,"
right,
or "It
right,
shouldn't be on your
right,
mind," or
right,
"I agree," or not. I'm just reflecting back their process, what's actually happening, of like, "Oh, how is that for you? Sounds like that's really kind of
mhm,
difficult." You know.
yeah,
Um, Now, I will also add, though, you're allowed, and I kind of said this earlier, you're allowed to protect yourself
mhm,
and be
mhm,
aware of what it is that you want in this interaction. So if having this type of a conversation is like, or well, that's nice for you, David. You're a therapist, right? But for the rest of us, like, I don't really want to do this. You're totally it's totally fine to say, wow, ooh, what a thorny topic. Anyway,
Right.
I should get back to work.
Right.
Right? Or it's okay to avoid it. If your intention is, I really want to connect with this person, how do I change the subject to something we can connect on?
Yeah.
That's okay too.
Yeah. I think what you said about intention, understanding your intention and the other person's intention is so important, right? Is when this person brings up this topic, right? Are they looking to be convinced or are they looking for validation and empathy? And again, it depends on the context, right? Who this person is to you, right? And if this is a loved one, right? If this is your partner and they're really upset, right? So they are probably not looking to be convinced, right? And I think what they want is, your support, right? And I think I would treat it in the same way that if my partner comes home and really upset about something that happened at work, right? My first thing is not to change her mind, like, "Oh, well, you probably are looking at this the wrong way," right? My first response should be to empathize, like, "Yeah, like that's really hard," right?
Uh,
And this is I think this is probably what a lot of people struggle with, right? It's like, how do you empathize? How to do a good job of empathy, and that's a skill that requires a lot of practice, right?
we're not raised with that. Nobody teaches us. Most of us, are not raised in families where you're really taught to, where you're modeled this, people empathizing with you, and this is how you empathize. It's like you said, a specialized
Right.
skill.
Right.
Although I think a lot of people feel, in our natural state, feel warmly or compassionately. We care about other people. I think oftentimes we just don't really know how to put it into words,
Yeah.
or we feel a little embarrassed talking about feelings, or
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I think, most people can probably do a pretty good job of empathizing with an issue that they feel neutral about, right? Like, hey,
mm,
your partner comes home, it's like, hey, my boss is a jerk, right? And it's like, oh yeah, like, yeah, it sounds like he's a jerk, like, that's terrible, right? So you can empathize with that. With politics, right? I think the issue is what if you actually take the other side? Like, what if you actually agree with the boss? And again, it comes down to what do you think the other person wants, right? When the other person is bringing up this issue. And then also understanding, like, okay, what is it? What is my objective in this conversation? Like, is it to support this person that I care about? Or is it maybe at some point I also want to maybe change this person's perspective or maybe add a different perspective?
I love what you're saying, and I think it's even okay to ask them if you're not sure what their intention is, their hope for this conversation.
Right.
To say, um, "Boy, I really appreciate you trusting me with sharing your feelings about this. How can I be
Mhm.
most helpful to you around this? Do you just want a listener? Are you interested in my thoughts
Mhm.
about this as well?" Um, and likewise, if you're going into a conversation, I think three things are useful. One, it can be helpful to acknowledge that this is from my parents. I was talking to them about this podcast
Mhm.
topic last night. It can
Mhm.
be helpful to acknowledge, one, this is a difficult topic. Hey, I know this might be a hard topic to talk about. Two, to get consent. It sounds like we're
Mhm.
talking
Mhm.
about sex or something, but like,
Yeah,
hey, I'm interested in talking to you, especially if it's somebody with a different view than yours, and you're going into the conversation. I'm interested in talking to you about what's going on in Minnesota right now. Are you open? Are you willing, interested in having that
right,
conversation with me? And
right.
allow them to say no, because maybe they're not in a state where they're ready to have that.
That's right. That's
And
right.
third, to share your intention. You
Yeah.
know, I'm really hoping that we can see a bit more eye to eye on this Tesla thing, Liang. I'm
Mhm.
interested hearing your thoughts and feelings about it, and I'd really appreciate if you could hear mine too. Is now a
Yeah.
good time for that?
Right, right.
So those 3 points: acknowledge that it's difficult, get consent, and share your intention.
That's right.
I
Yeah,
think are useful. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, like, the general framework, right, when the other person is upset, right, is to empathize, right, to bring down the sort of the emotional tone of the conversation. Right? Maybe both of you have that openness and curiosity, right, to hear and learn about the other person's perspective. And so that is a more intellectual conversation, and that usually would come after, right, the empathy and the validation.
I would say first and foremost, in my opinion, is make sure that it's really clear that you're supportive of each other, that you're supportive of, like, it's not worth, I assume, in 99.9% of circumstances, sabotaging or throwing out the window your relationship because, just so you can, share your ideological beliefs. So, really pay attention to listening, empathizing, being there for the other person, only sharing your views if they're ready to hear them. Anything else that feels important to add, Liang, before we go?
Yeah, I think the last point, I think it's if you do engage in a more intellectual conversation about, let's say, immigration, right? I think the difference is where the conflict is uh, lies in the values, right? Because I think we probably all value very similar things, right? Being compassionate to people, but maybe we also value being law abiding, right? Not breaking rules. Um, and so in this case, right, about immigration, right, perhaps this is when these two values come in conflict. Ultimately, in this kind of conversation, maybe it's seeking to understand what does the other person value and what do I value. And perhaps that's when you can actually reach a more mutual understanding of why we differ in our politics. Right?
I like that thought. It makes me think there's a gentleman, I forget his first name, Rappaport, who talked about, he was like an international negotiator, I think. Um, and he said, whenever the other person, uh, whenever you have a negative evaluation of the other person, to think about, can I say the same about myself? Or whenever I have a positive evaluation of my motivation, can I say the same about the other person? um, it's a little tangential, but what you're saying about values, about, if the other person, for example, values fairness, you might think that, like, that's another way to empathize, is to think, boy, I really do care about fairness also in a lot of contexts. Or if the other person cares about community, or, you know, well, that's, I thought, was thinking about this in terms of fairness, but I do care about community also. So you can find similarities, even if on the level of the strategy or the content you might differ. Can I
These-
just toss in that I think Teslas are very cool cars when I see them on the road now after our conversation, even though, just full disclosure, I'm not a terribly big fan of Elon Musk.
I told you, like, I'm actually really big in technology. Right? I like technology that helps my life, and so I
Yeah.
think the biggest reason why I bought Tesla is the self-driving feature, right?
Yeah.
That I can
I'm no fan of sitting in traffic and,
right.
grinding yourself down for hours. So I can understand that. All right, everybody. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this. And if you want to try some of these things, we'd love to hear how they go. Um, or if you want to tell us we're crazy, I'm never trying these things because I'm never talking about politics. I
Mhm.
have a lot of empathy for you. Feel free to if you want to leave comments as well about that.